Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Thanks, my friend. All right, and thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy to have you here with us on this Friday night. The White House and President Trump's Republican supporters in Congress first said that the impeachment proceedings against President Trump were unfair because there had been no floor vote in the House authorizing the impeachment inquiry. That was their first objection. This isn't a real impeachment. It's unfair. There has been no floor vote. Then, the House held a floor vote authorizing the impeachment inquiry, and that took care of that objection. So then they needed a new one. Then they said the impeachment inquiry against President Trump was actually unfair because the hearings to collect evidence in the inquiry were conducted behind closed doors. That was it. That was the next objection. There are no public hearings. And they stormed the closed-door hearing room to make this point. But then after expressing that as their big concern in terms of the fairness of the hearings, then, again, the House decided that, well, they would hold public hearings. They would hold lots and lots of public hearings, hours and hours of them, almost too many hours for any one person to watch without getting a cramp. That meant it was time for a new objection. What the White House and the president's Republican supporters in Congress came up with next was the objection that the president and his legal team had not been invited to participate in the impeachment proceedings. So no floor vote, then there's a floor vote. No public hearings, then there's public hearings. So this was their sort of next good try. This is not fair. This isn't a real impeachment. The president has not been invited to participate. And then naturally, the president was invited to participate. Well, today, the Trump White House responded to that invitation to them to participate in the impeachment proceedings, and they said, actually, they have no intention of participating in the proceedings anyway. At least that's what we think this letter means. I wanted to put the letter up there full screen just because I wanted you to know why I was distracted. The signature on this letter is so enormous and weird. It's a little bit hard to focus on anything else in terms of the content of this letter, but basically what we believe is that this is a letter from the White House counsel saying, no, we're not going to participate in your little charade. We still consider it unfair. I mean, what that means is for a third straight time, the objections by the White House and the president's Republican supporters that this is all so unfair, I mean, those objections, one by one, have been overtaken by events, right? If you had taken them at their word at any point over this impeachment saga so far, you might have thought their objection to the impeachment was that there hadn't been a floor vote, or it was behind closed doors, or the president hadn't been invited. But when all of those things they were complaining about got corrected, right? When all of those things in real terms came around to what they said they wanted, the White House and the Republicans in Congress still objected. They still said, this is all so unfair, we'll have nothing to do with it. Because of that, I mean, someday someone will teach a first-year law school class about how to identify bad faith in negotiations by running through exactly what the Republican objections have been on process grounds to how these impeachment proceedings have gone forward. But now, having been through all of that, there been no floor vote, the closed-door proceedings, the president has been invited to, after going through all of that, they now have unveiled a new objection as to why President Trump cannot actually be subject to this impeachment proceeding. A new noble stand they are taking for fairness and the American way. They have rolled it out with our friends at the Fox News Channel.
The whole thing is a joke. It is, frankly, very, very close to what Clarence Thomas once described as a modern-day lynch mob. The Democrats have no interest in the facts. And really, on the eve of Christmas, it is really sad to see the dishonesty and the partisanship that the House Democrats are displaying.
On the eve of Christmas? It is Christmas time, you guys, which is no time for an impeachment. I mean, any other time of the year, this might be okay, but not, what is it, it's 19 days before Christmas? This is the new objection. If there's one rule that all Americans should be able to agree on, or Republicans at least have the decency to adhere to, it's the rule that you don't pursue impeachment proceedings against an American president in the holiday season. Not while the Yule log burns in the hearth. Not while the sleigh bells ring. not while people are, decorating their Christmas trees. It's just against the rules.
Tom, the contrast could not have been more striking tonight. At the very moment the Republicans were releasing their 4 articles of impeachment, the president and first lady were lighting the national Christmas tree, festive, seemingly unconcerned.
In 1998, House Republicans released the 4 articles of impeachment they had been working on against President Clinton. They released those 4 articles of impeachment literally while President Clinton was in the act of lighting the national Christmas tree. Those impeachment proceedings against President Clinton were set in motion, of course, by the crusading Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who now is back here to let us know that Republicans at least have some sense of decency. They have some sense of the rules around what makes for a fair impeachment process and what doesn't. And frankly, Christmas time is part of what you have to consider.
And really, on the eve of Christmas, it is really sad to see the dishonesty and the partisanship that the House Democrats are displaying.
When the Republicans in 1998 released the draft articles of impeachment against President Clinton while he was lighting the national Christmas tree, it was 4 articles of impeachment that they released. When it came time to vote on those 4 articles of impeachment against President Clinton, 2 of them were voted down. 2 of them failed. But 2 of them went ahead on very close votes. There was an article on perjury where the vote was 228 to 206. There was also an article on obstruction that passed. That one was even closer, though. That one was 221 to 212. So 2 of the 4 passed. And under the Newt Gingrich, you can't impeach a president at Christmas time rule, just proclaimed on the Fox News channel this week, you should know that when it came time for the House to actually cast their votes on those impeachment articles, when it came time not just to introduce the articles, but for the House to vote on them, those votes took place on December 19th. Christmas week. I mean, they could have waited till after the Christmas holiday, but why would you do that? They apparently really wanted to do it right before Christmas, so much so that the House actually was called in on a Saturday to take those votes. It was strange enough timing that the NBC News archive footage of the network coverage of that historic impeachment vote against President Clinton is actually filed under golf, because it starts with an NBC anchor named Hannah Storm having to break in suddenly to the network's coverage of a Saturday afternoon golf match in order to announce that President Clinton was being impeached on the 19th of December.
Quite an athlete in his day. Hot.
Hello, everyone. Hannah Storm in New York. We will be returning to our coverage of the Lexus Challenge after a report from NBC News. An historic day for our country. And for the latest on the impeachment of President Clinton, we go to Tom Brokaw. Tom?
Thank you very much, Hannah. The president has been impeached on 2 articles in the House of Representatives.
It was December 19th, the Saturday before Christmas, 1998. That is timing that the Republican Party now apparently believes was just unconscionable. It's at least now not fair to pursue these impeachment proceedings against this president, given the holiday spirit. Never mind what we did before. And never mind all the other objections from them on supposed fairness grounds that have all been addressed now, one by one. All the things they complained about and said they want to change, they've all been changed. But they nevertheless continue to object. The main event now, the focus of what's about to happen in this presidency, the big deal at the heart of all of this is, of course, the factual and the evidentiary record that has been turned up in terms of President Trump's behavior. I mean, the sideshow, frankly, is this series of supposedly earnest objections to the process of this impeachment that keep getting thrown up by the White House and by the president's defenders, and then those objections keep getting rendered moot or rendered ridiculous, one after the other. And so I would caution my friends in the media and those of us who are responsible for sort of tracking this on behalf of the media in this country that it's not necessarily worth continuing to follow each bad faith objection after all the previous bad faith objections have been shown to be in bad faith, right? I mean, to a certain extent, after somebody says this is something they really care about, it's then revealed as something they actually can't possibly care about. You should be cautious the next time they try to sell you that same soft soap. I mean, you can't pretend it's not happening. You can't pretend that's not the way the Republicans are treating this. That is the record that the Trump White House and congressional Republicans will have recorded about them in the history books when it comes to their own behavior at this time in American history. But the members of Congress who will ultimately write the articles of impeachment against President Trump, a process that has just gotten underway, they have to decide how much they're going to consider the sort of bad faith objection environment in which they're operating and in which those articles will be received by the Republican Party and the White House, particularly if the people who are going to be pursuing the actual writing of these articles and the structure of the impeachment proceeding against the president are still hoping and expecting that votes on the articles against President Trump might in the end be even slightly bipartisan. In terms of the timeline, there is no month of Christmas exclusion rule. NBC News has just reported that lawmakers this year have been advised by House leadership that they should be available to be in Washington, whether for votes on articles or for other work related to the impeachment proceedings, as late as the 21st and 22nd of December this month. In the letter that was sent to the Judiciary Committee today by the White House counsel, that one with the gigantic signature by Mr. Cipollone, the one he put on there with like a paint roller, we think what that letter means is that unlike President Nixon and unlike President Clinton, President Trump is apparently not going to send defense counsel to represent him and make arguments on his behalf and do things like cross-examine witnesses at the impeachment hearings. Both President Nixon and President Clinton did that. We don't think that President Trump is going to do that. Now, I say we don't think that's what they're going to do because just textually, the letter today from White House counsel Pat Cipollone doesn't make anything all that clear one way or the other. I mean, I have seen my share of lawyer letters in my day, and as lawyer letters go, this is kind of a weird one. I mean, here's how it starts. Dear Chairman Nadler, as you know, your impeachment inquiry is completely baseless. That's the first line of the letter. House Democrats have wasted enough of America's time with this charade. You should end this inquiry now and not waste even more time with additional hearings. And that's not what lawyer letters typically look like, let alone lawyer letters from the White House. But I guess we interpret that to mean that the president won't be sending any defense counsel to the hearings? Maybe? This is another sort of hallmark of this time. This is another one of those letters from Mr. Cipollone, the White House counsel, that is coming in for some withering criticism from the rest of the lawyers in the world. An esteemed conservative lawyer named George Conway III, who is married to White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway, saying this tonight online, quote, "It is an utter embarrassment that any member of the bar, let alone the White House counsel, would write, sign, or send this letter." But that's kind of what the White House counsel's office is like now. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee responded, in any case, as if that letter from the White House was an indication that President Trump isn't going to mount a defense in the impeachment, that he's not going to send even legal counsel to defend him in impeachment proceedings. Chairman Nadler responded with this tonight to the White House, quote, "We gave President Trump a fair opportunity to question witnesses and present his own to address the overwhelming evidence before us. After listening to him complain about the impeachment process, we had hoped that he might accept our invitation. If the president has no good response to the allegations, then he would not want to appear before the committee. Having declined this opportunity, he cannot claim that the process is unfair. The president's failure will not prevent us from carrying out our solemn constitutional duty." So they're going ahead, with or without the president or any lawyers that might represent the president in these proceedings. Sounds like it will probably be without. They're just going to move forward. But even as the Judiciary Committee moves ahead, remember that one of the interesting things about the way the process is being conducted this time is that the Intelligence Committee, which conducted the investigation into what the president did, the main part of that investigation, that committee says that even though they have prepared their own report on impeachment and handed it over to the Judiciary Committee and said, you should get started on this effectively, they themselves have admitted that their own investigation isn't over, that they still expect to receive more evidence. And tonight there's some really interesting movement on that too. I'm not sure this has received a lot of attention tonight, but I find this absolutely fascinating. When the impeachment report was released by the Intelligence Committee earlier this week, all 300 pages of it, Section 1 was titled The President's Misconduct. Section 2 was titled The President's Obstruction of the Impeachment Inquiry. The whole thing is about the president's behavior. The day the report came out, you might remember us running down how the sort of subheadings of the report, they alone give you a really concise, tidy, kind of dramatic 78-word plot rundown of what the president's going to be impeached for. The president's request for a political favor. The president removed anti-corruption champion Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. The president's hand-picked agents began the scheme. The president froze vital military assistance. The president conditioned a White House meeting on investigations. The president pressed President Zelensky to do a political favor. The president's representatives ratcheted up pressure on the Ukrainian president. The president's security assistance hold became public. The president's scheme unraveled. The president's chief of staff confirmed aid was conditioned on investigations. Right? That's the children's book version of what President Trump did and what he's being impeached for. That's just the subheadings of the report. It's a very simple but dramatic plot with a nice denouement at the end where they all confess. But you see the theme there, right? Just looking at it as like a visual object, you see the theme in that tiny plot summary. The same two words that start every single one of those subheadings, right? It's all stuff done by the president or directed by the president. Section 1 of the report is about the president. Section 2 of the report is about the president. All the subheadings of the report are about the president. There is a laser focus of the whole report on the president specifically. The president's behavior, the president directing the scheme, the president perceiving benefit in this scheme. And because of that, there's one specific part of the impeachment report that stands out from all the rest of it that I've been thinking about all week since the report came out, trying to figure out how important this is going to be in the end and how important this is going to be for what comes next. And it's a sentence that doesn't start with the behavior of the president. It's from page 9 of the report, right up front at the beginning. Quote, "Our investigation determined that this telephone call between President Trump and the leader of Ukraine was neither the start nor the end of President Trump's efforts to bend U.S. foreign policy for his personal gain. Rather, it was a dramatic crescendo within a months-long campaign driven by President Trump, in which senior U.S. officials, including the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Chief of Staff, the Secretary of Energy, and others, were either knowledgeable of or active participants in an effort to extract from a foreign nation the personal political benefits sought by the president." The impeachment report is really all about President Trump specifically. It really all redounds to him. But the investigators do go out of their way to say, yeah, he was running this operation, but this little Benetton rainbow squad of very senior government officials, they were, what's the phrase? Either, quote, knowledgeable of or active participates in this scheme. The White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of Energy, who just suddenly quit his job when his name emerged in this scandal, Rick Perry, and the Vice President, Mike Pence. The impeachment investigators going out of their way to say they either knew about it or they were part and parcel of this scheme. Well, now tonight, here's something. You might remember that there was just one person from Vice President Mike Pence's office who testified in the impeachment hearings so far. Her name was Jennifer Williams. She's a career foreign service person. She was an advisor to the vice president, specifically on Russia and Europe. And at the start of her public testimony, you might remember there was a little low-key drama with her lawyer. Watch.
Ms. Williams, I want to ask you about a phone call between Vice President Pence and President Zelensky of Ukraine on September 18th. Were you on that call?
I was.
And did you take notes of the call?
Yes, sir.
Is there something about that call that you think may be relevant to our investigation?
Mr. Chairman, as we previously discussed with the committee, the Office of the Vice President has taken the position that the September 18th...
Sir, could you move the microphone a little closer to you?
As we've previously discussed with both majority and minority staff of the committee, the Office of the Vice President has taken the position that the September 18th call is classified.
There's Jennifer Williams on camera there as her lawyer, sort of not and then talking into the microphone. They went back and forth for this on this issue for a little while. Eventually, what they arrived at as an agreement, basically, in that public hearing, was that Jennifer Williams wouldn't answer questions about that call in the public hearing because Vice President Pence had decided that call was classified. But she did agree, on advice of her counsel, that she would give a written statement, a classified written statement to the committee about that call. House Intelligence Committee can handle classified information, right? That's sort of what the Intelligence Committee is there for. The agreement with Williams was that in this public hearing, that's classified, I can't talk about it, but I'm happy to answer written questions about it in writing in a classified annex to my testimony. I will submit that. So we saw that little agreement unfold during her testimony. Jennifer Williams has apparently since submitted that written submission, that classified submission about that part of her testimony. And apparently it's very interesting. The only reason I haven't seen it, the only reason I say that is because the Intelligence Committee has tonight sent a letter asking, sort of advising Vice President Mike Pence that he needs to declassify this matter so the public can see what she just testified to in that written submission. Oh, really? Check this out. In this letter sent to Vice President Pence tonight, the Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says this, quote, "In accordance with relevant regulations and procedures for handling classified information, Jennifer Williams, your special advisor for Europe and Russia, provided a classified supplemental submission to the committee on November 26th. In an unclassified cover letter to that submission, her counsel explained that, quote, in preparation for the November 19th hearing at which she testified in public, Ms. Williams reviewed certain materials that caused her to recall additional information about the September 18th call between Vice President Pence and the leader of Ukraine. Information that she wished to disclose to the committee for the sake of completeness." The letter says, quote, "Pursuant to the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry, I write now to request that the Office of Vice President declassify any classified material contained in that supplemental written submission. The committee believes that the information in Ms. Williams' supplemental submission is relevant to the impeachment inquiry and should not be classified. The committee reminds you that Executive Order 13526 states that in no case shall information be classified, continue to be maintained as classified, or fail to be declassified for the purpose of concealing any violations of law or preventing embarrassment of any person or entity. The Office of the Vice President's decision to classify certain portions of the September 18th call, including the additional information that Jennifer Williams remembered after her deposition and indicated she wished to convey to the committee as part of the impeachment inquiry, that cannot be justified on national security or any other legitimate grounds we can discern." So, no response yet from Vice President Mike Pence's office to that, at least that we know of. But, I mean, Vice President Pence and his role in this scheme for which President Trump is now being impeached, it remains one of the still dangling threads here. He apparently is the one who went in person to Europe to go meet with Zelensky after the Trump-Zelensky phone call to reiterate to Zelensky that he wasn't getting his military aid. He was briefed, according to his own advisors, on the call that happened between President Trump and President Zelensky, in which Trump made clear that Zelensky wasn't going to get his military aid unless Zelensky coughed up investigations of Joe Biden and his son and other types of politically motivated investigations that President Trump thought would help him get reelected. Vice President Pence has said that he'd be perfectly happy having his records of all his interactions with Ukraine released to the public. Well, here's a test of that, because his advisor testified in writing on a matter that he says is classified. It was about his communications with Ukraine. She says, I remembered something that I need to provide to the committee about this, provided it to them in writing because of that classification designation from his office. The committee says they've now reviewed that. They want it declassified. There's no reason on national security grounds to classify it. It should be declassified because it is relevant to impeachment, and the committee still investigating the impeachment scandal in this letter is warning Vice President Pence explicitly tonight, by the way, remember, you can't declare something to be classified just to keep it from being exposed as a crime or exposed as something that really embarrasses you. Embarrassment and criminal behavior are not good excuses for classification. That's just tonight. So, tick-tock. The next impeachment hearing is Monday morning, 9 a.m., even though it is vaguely the Christmas season. still happening despite that. Bad faith objections or not, classification threats or not. TikTok, here we go. Stay with us.